Let's take you now back to Durban, and that, of course, is where the funeral of the late Cabinet Minister Pravin Gordhan has just taken place. The official funeral has wrapped up. I'm going to take you now to my colleague Minoshni Pillay, who is standing by for us at the Clare Estate Crematorium, where a private ceremony, of course, of the cremation is going to be taking place. Those are live visuals we are bringing you now on our screen. Minoshni, if you can hear us, just of course take us through what is happening at this point in time. We understand, of course, that this is the private ceremony for the family. They have, of course, invited President Cyril Ramaphosa to accompany them.
Unati, good afternoon. Yes, former Minister Pravin Gordhan has made his final journey now to the Clare Estate Crematorium. The name Pravin Jamnadas Gordhan, just to give you some background of Gujarati origin, it has its origins in India's Yamuna River, one of the 7 sacred rivers of India, and I think a pretty apt meaning for Minister Gordhan. In Hinduism, and we know that Hindu rites have been conducted at various points in the wake of the minister's death, and we saw that at his home in a private viewing on Tuesday in Pretoria, and earlier today when the body reached the Nkosi Albert Luthuli Center in Durban as well. And in Hinduism, rivers are synonymous with the flow of knowledge, learning and wisdom. So his name, Jamnadas, of Gujarati origin, I think an apt legacy to Minister Gordhan's acumen, his knowledge and wisdom that he brought to his portfolios. And while we understand that the family have requested a private viewing and final send-off, and prior to the cremation late this afternoon, there are a few mourners that have gathered here, ordinary South Africans that have come to say their final goodbyes to the late minister and to pay their condolences to the family. You'll see that members of his family are now gathering to usher his casket in, his mortal remains. We saw earlier President Cyril Ramaphosa handing the South African flag over to his wife, Vanitha Raju. Emotional, telling and fitting tributes being paid from both his daughters. And what will now likely happen at the crematorium is that the minister's body will be taken in by his family. The South African Police Service have officially handed the body over to the family now, and the family will take over the completion of the Hindu rites according to how they practice it as a family. And we've seen a very simple and elegant, simplified way that the family have approached the way they've practiced the Hindu rites in what has been evident to the public, let me add. And then the cremation will happen privately, of course, with the family. And in Hinduism, death is not the end. In Hinduism, in Hindu scriptures, it tells us that death is and could lead to a rebirth of the soul, that it's simply the passing away of the physical body, but that it is a rebirth of the soul until the soul is reborn as many times as it takes for the soul to reach what in Hinduism is termed as moksha, moksha being eternal grace and eternal peace. So by no means, according to Hindu scripture, is death seen, while it is an exceptionally trying and devastating time for the Gordhan family, and any family at that. According to Hindu custom and Hindu scripture, death is a rebirth until eternal peace is achieved by that soul. So we also see Ila Gandhi here, members of the Gordhan family, a very, very small group, and I think people have respected the call from the family to grant them privacy in this final moments with him. I'll just let our viewers take in some of the visuals as the casket is taken into the hall. in order to respect the families, in order to respect the family's wishes for privacy that they have called upon from the minute the late minister's death was announced, we are going to remain outside the hall and not proceed into it. This is their last moments with a husband, a father, a friend, and I think this is where, I think perhaps his journey as a freedom fighter, according to Gordhan, would never really end, no matter where he was. However, this is a time that the family really have not had with him. We heard his elder daughter speaking about the sacrifices that he'd made for them, the years that he spent away from the family. And sadly, Minister Gordhan retiring just earlier this year, finally taking a step down from politics, and close friends to the family, Nishan Bolton from the Kathrada Foundation, earlier telling us that this is the time he really wanted. And in fact, Nishan Bolton saying they were planning family holidays. And so while he's been a very public figure, first starting off fighting for democracy and then serving as a minister in several ministerial positions, this is a time now for the family, unfortunately very short-lived since his retirement, to have with him. Unati?
And I mean, you mentioned the daughters, Minoshni, and I think that is an important one, because for the first time, I think millions of South Africans just got a glimpse and a sense of who the former late Minister Pravin Gordhan really was, as a family man. I was just listening to, of course, Anisha Gordhan and, of course, Priyesha Gordhan, who is a younger daughter, who spoke after, her older sister, saying that she may look like the father. And she did. She resembled, his outward looks, but she said she doesn't have necessarily the stature in terms of just public speaking. But importantly, she talked about the relationship that he had, with her mother, of course, his wife. And the family really just rallied around their mother at this point in time. I would imagine, Minoshni, it was emotional at that point where the two daughters described the father in a different light to what we've been hearing over the past couple of days since his death.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think her exact words were that my dad always said he served at the pleasure of the president, and then she would always quip in, and at Vanitha, referring to her mother. And she really took a moment to pay tribute to her mother, always standing by her father's side, saying, I think she described them as twin flames and more than soulmates. So you will know that Vanitha Raju and her daughter had met the late minister at a very different time, where he, as she said, he spent more time with the family. He had more time to spend with the family. And both his daughters really, really looking forward to enjoying their dad in their retirement. And also, I think, Unati, what stood out, apart from you must excuse, we're in very windy conditions outside this crematorium, but I think what stood out for me as well, and for our viewers, is the stance that his daughters took to defend his legacy, to stand up and come out and say that he was vilified, that he was criticized, that he stood up for what was right. And they then called on South Africans to do the same in the wake of his death, and not to forget that standing up for what is right may not always be the easy thing to do. His daughters really speaking in the vein of their late father, almost sounding like him. And I think that was a really fitting tribute to him. We've all heard him speak about how much he loves his daughters, and his friends close to him have also alluded to that. So I think, speaking in the same vein, almost sounding like their father, their late father, was incredibly, incredibly powerful, incredibly difficult, because both girls remained very composed in what was a very difficult message to relay.
And in fact, you're right. She did actually say that, she she thought they were soulmates, but then she now realizes actually that they are twin flames. I actually like that analogy. But just going back to what other speakers had to say, I'm going to touch on a little bit on what President Cyril Ramaphosa also said earlier on, just giving his eulogy, saying, and essentially echoing what every other speaker had been saying, in that, Pravin Gordhan led a steadfast fight against state capture. But importantly, you mentioned just the whole process on what we are witnessing now in as far as the family seeking privacy. This is a man who has fought pretty much all his life, for or against corruption, for the democracy of this country. And what the family thought they would have in his retirement was time with him. But unfortunately, they didn't. So it is important that they have this time, at least, in this private ceremony that is steeped in tradition, just to spend those few minutes, honoring him and remembering him. How important is this, just from a traditional and a spiritual point of view, from a Hindu perspective?
I would say, and the interfaith field that opened up the state official funeral was very symbolic of who the late minister was. Pravin Gordhan was a man of all South Africans, and yes, there are Hindu rites being conducted here. And like we say, one cannot generalize in terms of Hindu rites being the same for every Hindu family. While Pravin Gordhan was born into a Gujarati trading family in Durban, 75 years ago, Hindu rites are practiced differently according to different families, and so it would not be factual of us to assume how far or what specific rites were performed. But like I said, what binds all families under Hinduism together is the fact that death is a rebirth, and death will lead to eternal moksha once the soul feels it has fulfilled all its karmic duties on this earth that we come to as human beings. And so that's what binds all Hindu families, irrespective of what Hindu rites you perform or how far you think you need to perform these rites or how far you need to go. And what's been evident from Minister Gordhan's funeral from the very start and leading up to today has been the simplicity with which his family have approached the entire process. Very simple coffin, his flag leaving his home draped in the ANC flag and receiving aptly the South African flag at the ICC, and, returning to the crematorium with not even a bouquet of flowers on it. A very simple, elegant and fitting send-off for a man that many have described as someone who put people first. In fact, that was his message at the 130th anniversary of the Natal Indian Congress recently, and we know he penned it while he was very sick and very unwell. And in it, he called for just a reset, and there's a lot that's been said about that, and perhaps we can chat about that further next. But really, his message was not just to reset, but for leaders and South Africans to be put first, for the ordinary man on the ground to be put first. And that was one of his parting messages.